Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into the smoky, deafening world of Victorian Britain's Industrial Revolution, where you'll experience firsthand what it truly meant to work in one of those massive factories that transformed the world forever. You can smell the coal smoke hanging thick in the air, feel the vibration of massive steam engines beneath your feet, and hear the relentless clatter of machinery that never, ever stops. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why your great-great-grandmother always seemed to cough, or why entire families moved from peaceful countryside villages to crowded, sooty cities. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. I'd love to hear where and when you started watching this video. Or perhaps you could share a compliment about how these historical journeys help you drift off to sleep. Your support means everything to this channel's growth. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. The bell clangs through the darkness at 4:30 in the morning, its harsh bronze voice cutting through your dreams like a rusty knife. You jolt awake in your narrow bed, sharing the thin mattress with two younger siblings who groan and shift but don't wake. They're too young for factory work, at least for now. The sound echoes off the grimy brick walls of your tenement building, bouncing down the narrow alleyways where hundreds of other workers are stirring to life in identical rooms stacked like matchboxes against the industrial sky. Your feet hit the cold floorboards with a dull thud, and you fumble in the pre-dawn darkness for the same clothes you wore yesterday and the day before that. The fabric feels stiff with dried sweat and cotton fibres that seem to cling to everything in this industrial world, turning your garments into a second skin of dust and grime. Through the single window, barely larger than a picture frame, you can see pinpricks of candlelight flickering to life in windows across the narrow courtyard as your neighbours begin their own reluctant dance with dawn. The factory bell continues its relentless call, joined now by others across the city, a symphony of brass and iron that announces another day of endless toil. The sound layers upon itself, creating an urgent metal chorus that seems to seep into your very bones. You've learned to count the intervals between rings with the precision of a church sexton. You have exactly 12 minutes to dress. Splash your face with cold water from the shared basin that serves your entire floor, and make your way through the maze of narrow streets to reach the factory gates before they slam shut with the finality of a prison door. Latecomers face hefty fines that can cost a day's wages, and in 1850s Manchester, every penny matters when you're earning barely enough to keep body and soul together. The factory owners have calculated these penalties with mathematical precision, just enough to hurt without destroying their workforce entirely. It's a delicate balance of exploitation that would make a medieval lord blush with envy. You step into the street and immediately taste the familiar cocktail of coal smoke, sewage, and that peculiar metallic tang that hangs over industrial cities like a permanent grey blanket. The air itself feels thick, almost chewy, coating your throat with each breath. The cobblestones are slick with morning dew mixed with soot, creating a treacherous surface that has claimed many an ankle and sent countless workers tumbling into the gutters that run with mysterious dark liquids. Around you, the Great Migration begins, hundreds of workers emerging from cramped doorways like ants from disturbed hills, all shuffling in the same direction toward the towering brick monuments that dominate the horizon. The crowd moves with the resigned urgency of people who have no choice, their faces bearing the particular expression of those who have learned to endure what cannot be changed. The sound of wooden clogs on cobblestones creates a rhythmic percussion that grows louder as streams of workers merge into rivers, then torrents of humanity flowing toward their mechanical destinies. The clatter is hypnotic, almost musical, Though no one has the energy for actual music at this ungodly hour, you recognise faces from your street. Mrs. Thompson, who works in the weaving shed, and whose fingers have been permanently stained blue from the dyes. Young Billy, who feeds cotton into the carding machines, despite being barely tall enough to reach them properly. Old Samuel, whose persistent cough echoes through the tenement walls at night like a death rattle counting down the days. Nobody speaks much at this hour. Conversation requires energy that must be carefully hoarded and conserved for the 12 hours of standing, lifting, and mechanical motion that lie ahead. Words are a luxury that factory workers learn to ration like bread or coal. The silence isn't peaceful. It's the heavy quiet of exhaustion that has become a permanent state of being. Steam rises from manholes and factory chimneys, creating ghostly columns that twist and dissipate in the morning air, like the spirits of workers who didn't make it through the previous winter. The city breathes smoke like a living creature, and you've become part of its circulatory system, another red blood cell carrying oxygen to the industrial organs that keep this mechanical beast alive. Historians still argue whether the Industrial Revolution liberated workers from agricultural poverty or simply created new forms of human suffering wrapped in the promise of progress. But such philosophical debates seem distant and abstract when your stomach growls with hunger and your muscles ache from yesterday's unrelenting labour. As you round the corner onto Factory Street, the massive brick structure looms before you like a medieval fortress designed by someone with a particularly grim imagination. 6 stories of windows glow yellow with gaslight, creating the illusion of warmth that you know is entirely false. The smokestacks reach toward the grey sky like enormous fingers grasping for something that will always remain just out of reach. The building stretches for nearly a city block, its walls blackened with years of soot and grime that have created abstract patterns resembling the work of some mad industrial artist. You can already hear the mechanical heartbeat from within, the deep, rhythmic thump of steam engines that sounds like the pulse of some enormous metal heart, and the higher-pitched whir of spinning machinery that never sleeps, never rests, never shows mercy to flesh and bone. The factory bell gives its final, commanding clang, and your pace quickens along with everyone else's. Being late isn't just about losing money. It's about losing your position entirely in a world where unemployment means starvation. And there are always desperate souls waiting outside the gates like vultures, hoping someone won't show up so they can take their place at the machines. The massive iron gates swing open with a groan that sounds like the jaws of some industrial beast preparing to swallow you whole. You surge forward with the crowd, swept along in a tide of desperate humanity that crashes against the factory entrance like waves against a breakwater. The press of bodies is immediate and suffocating, shoulders bumping against shoulders. The sharp elbow of a woman clutching her tin lunch pail, the rough scratch of wool jackets and cotton aprons creating a symphony of fabric friction that mingles with the hurried breathing of hundreds of anxious workers. The gatekeeper, a burly man with arms like gnarled tree trunks and a permanent scowl carved deep into his weathered face by years of dawn duty, counts heads with the mechanical precision of a human abacus. His eyes scan the crowd with predatory efficiency, cataloguing familiar faces and noting absences that will be reported to management within the hour. Each missing worker represents lost production, and lost production means angry investors demanding explanations that will trickle down through the hierarchy until someone at the bottom pays the price. You feel the industrial odours hit you like a physical wall as you cross the threshold. The acrid bite of coal smoke mixed with hot metal, machine oil that has the consistency and smell of liquid machinery, and that distinctive burnt scent that comes from cotton fibres meeting heated metal rollers at impossible speeds. The smell clings to your clothes, your hair, your very skin, marking you as clearly as a brand marks cattle. Even on Sundays, when the factory stands silent, you carry this olfactory signature wherever you go, The entrance hall stretches before you like the nave of some unholy cathedral dedicated to the worship of industrial progress, its ceiling lost in a maze of shadows and steam pipes that twist and branch like the circulatory system of some mechanical god. Gas jets flicker along the walls in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows that make the space seem alive with movement even before a single machine has stirred to life. The flames create an almost hellish atmosphere, though the warmth they provide is desperately welcome in the pre-dawn chill that seems to seep through the brick walls, despite their impressive thickness. The floor beneath your feet tells its own story, worn smooth by countless thousands of workers who have made this same journey day after day, year after year, their footsteps polishing the stone until it gleams like black marble in the gaslight. You can see the paths worn deepest by the most common routes, creating subtle channels that guide the flow of human traffic as surely as riverbanks guide water. The stone is slick with moisture from the steam that perpetually escapes from the machinery deeper in the building, creating a treacherous surface that has claimed many ankles and sent numerous workers sprawling. You're herded along with the others toward a series of wooden boards mounted on the walls, where the day's assignments are posted in chalk script that looks like the handwriting of some bureaucratic ghost. The foremen stand nearby like generals surveying their troops before a battle, their brass pocket watches gleaming in the gaslight as they prepare to divide the workforce into their designated battalions. These men have perfected the art of seeing workers not as individuals with names, families, and dreams, but as interchangeable components in their great mechanical symphony, each person valued only for their ability to keep pace with the relentless, metronomic rhythm of industrial production. The crowd spreads out across the vast space with a choreographed chaos that speaks to months and years of practice. And you catch your first proper glimpse of the factory floor through brick archways that lead deeper into the building's mechanical heart. The sight never fails to steal your breath, though whether from awe at human engineering prowess or horror at what humanity has created to serve it, you're never quite certain. Massive spinning frames stretch into the distance like metallic forests, their hundreds of bobbins whirring in perfect synchronization, creating a visual rhythm that's almost hypnotic in its mechanical precision. Steam pipes run along the ceiling like the arteries of some enormous iron creature, occasionally releasing controlled bursts of vapor that create momentary white clouds before dissipating into the already thick air. The temperature inside the building is always at least 10 degrees warmer than the outside world, a combination of concentrated body heat from hundreds of workers, the massive steam engines that power everything, and the constant friction generated by thousands of moving parts working in perpetual motion. By midday, the heat will become almost unbearable, turning the factory into a mechanical furnace. But for now, in the early morning chill that penetrates even the thickest wool, it feels almost welcoming. You begin to notice the peculiar social hierarchy that governs this industrial microcosm as different groups of workers separate according to their roles, status, and the complex pecking order that develops in any closed system. The spinners, mostly women with nimble fingers made quick by necessity and sharp eyes trained to spot broken threads in milliseconds, gather near the massive spinning frames that will soon hum with deadly efficiency. The weavers cluster around the power looms that will roar to life with deafening intensity once the steam builds sufficient pressure. The doffers, many of them children whose small size allows them to scurry beneath the moving machinery to replace empty bobbins, seem to materialize from the shadows like industrial sprites, their diminutive forms already perfectly adapted to navigating the dangerous maze of belts, gears, and spinning parts. A fascinating social phenomenon emerges as you watch the crowd organize itself with unconscious precision. Workers have developed their own intricate communication system of subtle nods, meaningful gestures, and brief but information-rich eye contact that, allows them to share crucial intelligence without alerting the ever-watchful foreman to their conversations. A slight tilt of the head might indicate which machines are running roughly today and likely to cause problems, while a quick glance toward a particular overseer serves as a warning about someone's foul mood that could result in arbitrary fines or extra punishments for the slightest infractions. The factory's most experienced workers move through this morning ritual with a particular grace born of countless repetitions. They know intuitively exactly where to step to avoid the worst of the oil stains that never quite wash out of the stone floor, which metal railings to avoid because they're still radiating heat from the night shift's labours, and how to position themselves strategically to catch the best available light from the tall windows for the intricate, eye-straining work that lies ahead. Historians still argue whether these finely tuned adaptive behaviours represent admirable human resilience in the face of adversity, or simply the tragic accommodation of people systematically forced to accept conditions that should be utterly unacceptable to any civilized society. You find yourself assigned to the second floor, where the cotton carding machines turn raw fibres into the long, continuous strands that will eventually become thread. The assignment board lists your name in chalk next to Carding Room 2B, a designation that carries its own weight of meaning among the workers. The second floor is considered moderately desirable, high enough to escape some of the worst heat and humidity that plagues the ground level, but not so high as the top floors where the summer heat becomes truly unbearable and workers occasionally faint at their stations. The staircase leading upward is narrow and steep, its wooden steps worn into smooth valleys by the passage of countless feet over the decades. Each step bears the permanent impression of industrial boots, creating a topographical map of human endurance etched in worn wood. The higher you climb, the more oppressive the atmosphere becomes, not just the heat, which builds noticeably with each floor, but the sound, which seems to intensify and focus as it bounces off the ceiling and walls, creating acoustic chambers that amplify every mechanical noise into something approaching a physical assault on your eardrums. Through the tall windows that line the factory walls like the eye sockets of some enormous skull, you catch fragmentary glimpses of the world outside, other factories belching their morning offerings of smoke into the grey sky, the narrow cobblestone streets where late-arriving workers still hurry toward their destinations with the desperate gait of people who know exactly what tardiness costs, and in the far distance, barely visible through the industrial haze, the green hills that seem impossibly remote from this mechanical realm. The contrast is jarring and somehow deeply melancholy. Outside, sparrows begin their tentative morning songs and dew still clings to the few surviving patches of grass that have somehow escaped the urban sprawl. While inside, you prepare to enter a world where nature has been not just subdued but entirely banished by human engineering and industrial necessity. The morning shift supervisor, a thin man with permanently ink-stained fingers and the pale, almost translucent complexion of someone who rarely sees natural sunlight, begins his daily inspection of the arriving workers with the methodical thoroughness of a military officer reviewing troops before battle. His eyes move systematically from person to person, cataloguing clean hands, proper attire, and visible signs of alertness or fatigue that will determine who gets assigned to the more skilled and slightly better paying positions, and who will spend the day performing the most mind-numbing repetitive tasks that require little skill but maximum endurance. As the great steam engines somewhere deep in the building's mechanical bowels begin to build pressure for the day's production, you feel the entire structure start to vibrate with a subtle but persistent tremor beneath your feet. The sensation travels up through the floorboards, through the soles of your worn boots, and settles into your bones like some industrial fever. It's a feeling that will become so familiar over the coming months that you'll eventually stop consciously noticing it. though your body will never fully adapt to the constant, almost imperceptible movement that makes the factory feel less like a static building and more like some enormous, living machine preparing to digest another day of concentrated human effort and transform it into profitable cotton goods. The final preparations are being made around you as workers take their assigned positions with the weary efficiency of people who have performed this same ritual hundreds of times before. And the great mechanical heart of the factory prepares to beat once again. Your station awaits you like a mechanical altar, where you'll sacrifice the next 12 hours of your life to the gods of industrial production. The carding machine stretches before you, a contraption of metal cylinders covered in thousands of tiny wire teeth that will comb raw cotton into parallel fibres with ruthless efficiency. The machine stands about waist high, its cast iron frame painted a utilitarian dark green that has been chipped and worn by countless hands gripping its edges during long shifts that blur together into an endless parade of mechanical motion. You take your position at the machine's side, your feet finding the familiar worn spots on the wooden floorboards where generations of workers have stood before you. The floor beneath the carding machines is permanently stained with cotton oil and metal filings, creating abstract patterns that tell the story of industrial accidents, spilled lubricants, and the gradual accumulation of cotton dust that seems to coat every surface in this mechanical cathedral. The stains have been ground so deep into the wood that they've become part of the grain itself, a permanent record of human toil embedded in the very foundation of the building. The raw cotton arrives at your station in large wicker baskets that scratch your hands when you reach into them, the fibres still containing seeds, leaves, and other debris from the distant fields where it grew under southern sun before making its way to this grey northern city. You lift handfuls of the material, feeling its surprising weight. Cotton may look light and fluffy, but in these quantities it becomes dense and heavy, requiring real strength to manipulate efficiently throughout the long workday ahead. The process begins when you feed the cotton into the machine's hungry metal mouth, watching as the rotating cylinders grab the fibres and pull them through a series of increasingly fine wire combs. The sound is distinctive, a rhythmic scraping and brushing that becomes the soundtrack to your existence, interrupted only by the occasional snap of a particularly stubborn fibre, or the metallic ping of a small stone or seed hull being ejected by the mechanical teeth. Each machine has its own subtle personality, its own rhythm and quirks that you learn to recognise as intimately as a musician knows their instrument. The work requires a peculiar combination of mindless repetition and constant vigilance. Your hands must maintain a steady rhythm feeding cotton into the machine, but your eyes must watch constantly for tangles, blockages, or the telltale signs that the mechanism is about to jam, a disaster that can shut down production and result in severe penalties from the ever-present supervisors who patrol the floor with clipboards and stern expressions. The cotton emerges from the other end of the machine transformed into neat, parallel strands called slivers, which you must guide into waiting containers with practiced motions that become automatic after weeks of repetition. The temperature around the carding machines is noticeably higher than the general factory floor due to the friction generated by thousands of metal teeth working at high speed. Within the first hour of operation, you can feel sweat beginning to form beneath your collar and along your hairline, though the real heat won't build until mid-morning when the accumulated warmth from hundreds of machines turns the entire floor into something resembling a mechanical furnace. The air shimmers slightly above the machines, creating heat mirages that make distant objects appear to dance and waver like desert visions. Around you, other workers take their positions at identical machines, their movements synchronized by necessity and long practice. Mrs. Jenkins, a woman in her 40s whose fingers move with the precision of a pianist, operates the machine to your right with efficiency that comes from 15 years of experience. She can spot potential problems before they occur, adjusting her feeding technique to prevent jams and maintaining a production rate that consistently exceeds the quotas that management posts on the wall each morning in stark black numerals. To your left, young Thomas, barely 16 but already marked by the pale complexion and slight stoop that characterises long-time factory workers, struggles slightly with his machine, his inexperienced hands occasionally feeding the cotton too quickly or too slowly, causing minor disruptions that ripple through his production line. The supervisors notice these irregularities immediately, making marks in their ledgers that will affect his weekly pay and potentially his continued employment if the problems persist. The factory's peculiar social dynamics become apparent as you settle into your rhythm. Information travels through subtle signals and whispered conversations during the brief moments when supervisors turn their attention elsewhere. A slight nod from Mrs. Jenkins warns you that the floor supervisor is approaching from behind, allowing you to adjust your posture and increase your apparent concentration. A quick gesture from Thomas indicates that his machine is developing a grinding noise that might signal mechanical trouble requiring the attention of the maintenance crew. Historians still argue whether the repetitive nature of factory work represented a form of industrial meditation that allowed workers to find peace within routine, or whether it constituted a form of psychological torture designed to break down human individuality and creativity. Standing at your station, feeding cotton into the endless hunger of your mechanical partner, you begin to understand why this debate continues to fascinate scholars who have never spent 12 hours watching metal teeth comb fibre into profitable uniformity. The morning light filtering through the tall windows creates shifting patterns on the factory floor as clouds move across the sky outside, providing the only natural variation in an environment designed to eliminate unpredictability. You learn to treasure these small changes, the way shadows move across your workstation, the subtle shift in light quality that marks the passage of time when clocks are forbidden and the only measure of progress is the slowly filling containers of processed cotton slivers. Your machine develops its own rhythm as it warms up, the metal expanding slightly and settling into its optimal operating temperature. The sound changes subtly, becoming slightly deeper and more resonant, and you adjust your feeding technique accordingly. This is the kind of specialized knowledge that separates experienced workers from newcomers, the ability to read the mechanical moods and requirements of individual machines, understanding their quirks and preferences as if they were living creatures rather than assemblies of metal and wood. The cotton dust begins to accumulate almost immediately, settling on every surface like a fine snow that never melts. It coats your hair, your clothes, and most insidiously, your lungs with each breath you take. The dust creates its own microclimate around each machine, catching and reflecting the gaslight to create an almost ethereal atmosphere that would be beautiful if it weren't slowly killing everyone who breathes it. You develop the unconscious habit of breathing through your nose whenever possible, though this provides only minimal protection against the microscopic particles that will eventually leave their mark on every factory worker's respiratory system. The peculiar geography of your workstation becomes intimately familiar within the first few hours. You know exactly how far you can reach in each direction without stepping away from your optimal position, where to place your feet to avoid the worst of the oil stains while maintaining balance during the long hours of standing, and how to angle your body to minimize strain on your back while maximizing your ability to monitor both the cotton feeding and the sliver collection simultaneously. These spatial adaptations represent a form of embodied knowledge that can't be taught from books or explained in words. It must be learned through the patient accumulation of physical experience. The social ecosystem of the carding room operates according to unwritten rules that govern everything from who speaks to whom during brief rest periods to how assistance is offered when someone's machine malfunctions. Seniority matters enormously. not just for better positions or slightly higher pay, but for the small privileges that make factory life bearable, like being positioned near a window for natural light, or having access to the slightly better tools that make the work marginally easier. Mrs. Jenkins commands respect, not just for her skill, but for her ability to navigate the complex politics of factory life. Knowing when to speak up and when to remain silent, when to help a struggling co-worker and when such help might be interpreted as criticism by the watchful supervisors. The morning progresses with mechanical precision, marked not by clocks but by the gradual filling of cotton sliver containers and the steady accumulation of processed material that represents your contribution to the vast industrial machine. Your hands develop their own intelligence, learning to feel the quality of the cotton through touch alone, recognizing when a particular batch contains too much debris, when the fibers are unusually short or tangled, or when the moisture content is off in ways that will affect the carding process. This tactile knowledge becomes as important as visual observation, allowing you to maintain quality while keeping pace with the relentless demands of industrial production. The factory's acoustic environment creates its own form of communication as workers learn to distinguish between different types of mechanical sounds and what they signify. The healthy hum of properly functioning machinery provides a baseline against which any deviation becomes immediately apparent to experienced ears. A slight change in pitch might indicate that a bearing is beginning to wear, while a rhythmic clicking could signal that cotton is building up somewhere in the mechanism and needs to be cleared before it causes a major jam. The overseer's footsteps announce his approach long before you see him, a deliberate, measured stride that carries the authority of someone who holds your economic survival in his calloused hands. Mr. Hartwell moves through the carding room like a predator surveying his territory, his keen eyes scanning every worker, every machine, every subtle detail that might indicate inefficiency or insubordination. He carries a leather-bound ledger tucked under his arm and a stub of pencil behind his ear, tools of measurement and judgment that transform human effort into neat columns of numbers and profit calculations. You feel your shoulders unconsciously straighten as he approaches your station, your hands automatically increasing their pace even though you are already working at near maximum efficiency. This involuntary response is shared by every worker within his vicinity, a collective holding of breath that ripples across the factory floor like wind moving through wheat. The overseer's power extends beyond mere supervision. He controls work assignments, determines who receives the slightly better tools, and most crucially, decides who gets fined for infractions both real and imagined. The system of fines represents one of the factory's most insidious forms of control, turning every aspect of work into the potential penalty. Being 2 minutes late cost you an hour's wages. Talking during work hours results in a fine equivalent to half a day's pay. Breaking a tool, even through normal wear and legitimate accident, means having its replacement cost deducted from your weekly earnings. Most perversely, working too slowly incurs penalties, but working too quickly and making mistakes brings even harsher financial punishment. The fines are posted on a board near the main entrance, written in stark black ink that serves as both warning and daily reminder of the precarious nature of your employment. Mr. Hartwell stops beside Mrs. Jenkins' machine, his practiced eye immediately assessing the quality of her cotton slivers and the steadiness of her production rate. He makes a small notation in his ledger, whether positive or negative. You can't tell, but Mrs. Jenkins' slight smile suggests she's maintained the standards that have kept her employed for 15 years. The overseer's evaluation system operates according to criteria that are never fully explained to workers. You learn through painful trial and error what constitutes acceptable performance, discovering the invisible boundaries only when you've crossed them and faced the consequences. The psychological weight of constant surveillance affects every worker differently. Some, like Thomas, become visibly nervous under observation, their hands shaking slightly as they try to maintain their rhythm while being watched. Others, like Mrs. Jenkins, seem to thrive under scrutiny, their movements becoming even more precise and efficient when they know they're being evaluated. You find yourself somewhere between these extremes, maintaining your work pace but feeling the familiar knot of anxiety that forms in your stomach whenever authority figures draw near. The overseer's inspection extends beyond simple productivity measurements. He checks for cleanliness. Cotton dust on clothing is expected, but excessive dirt or signs of slovenly personal hygiene can result in penalties. He observes posture and deportment, looking for signs of fatigue or illness that might affect work quality. Most invasively, he monitors social interactions, making note of which workers speak to each other during brief permissible moments, and whether these conversations might be undermining factory discipline or spreading discontent among the workforce. Historians still argue whether the industrial overseer system represented a necessary form of quality control in early manufacturing, or whether it constituted a form of workplace tyranny designed to extract maximum labour while suppressing worker autonomy. Standing under Mr. Hartwell's calculating gaze, watching him transform your human effort into mathematical abstractions in his ledger, the answer seems depressingly clear. The tools of oversight extend beyond mere human observation. The factory employs a sophisticated system of bells and whistles that mark the rhythm of the workday with military precision. The breakfast bell, still hours away, will allow exactly 20 minutes for workers to consume whatever food they've brought from home. The dinner bell provides 30 minutes of respite during which conversation is grudgingly permitted. Though workers learn quickly to avoid topics that might be considered subversive or complaining, even these brief breaks are monitored, with supervisors noting who associates with whom and whether any gatherings might represent the dangerous formation of worker solidarity. The overseer carries with him an almost supernatural ability to detect the smallest infractions and inefficiencies. He can spot a worker whose attention has wandered for even a few seconds, identify machines that are running slightly below optimal speed, and notice when someone has taken an extra moment to rest their aching back or stretch their cramped fingers. This hypervigilant surveillance creates an atmosphere of constant tension that affects not just productivity, but the very psychology of the workforce, transforming natural human behaviours into sources of anxiety and potential punishment. You watch as Mr. Hartwell approaches young Thomas's station, his expression already showing the disapproval that comes from observing irregular production rates. Thomas's inexperience shows in the slight variations in his feeding technique, creating cotton slivers that are sometimes thicker or thinner than the strict standards require. The overseer makes several notations in his ledger, and you can see Thomas's face pale as he realizes his mistakes are being documented in permanent record. The economic mathematics of factory discipline become clear as you observe the overseer's methodical documentation. Each worker represents an investment in training and placement that must generate consistent returns through reliable productivity. Any deviation from expected performance levels threatens not just individual employment, but the carefully calculated profit margins that justify the factory's existence. The overseer functions as the human interface between mechanical requirements and biological limitations, tasked with pushing workers to their maximum sustainable output while maintaining just enough humanity to prevent complete breakdown or rebellion. The factory's disciplinary system operates on the principle that workers, like machines, can be fine-tuned through the application of appropriate incentives and penalties. The overseer serves as both mechanic and operator, adjusting human performance through a combination of surveillance, measurement, and strategic application of consequences that shape behaviour more effectively than any written rules or formal training could achieve. As Mr. Hartwell moves past your station, you catch a whiff of the pomade he uses to slick back his thinning hair. a small luxury that marks his elevated status in the factory hierarchy. His clothing, while not expensive, is notably cleaner and better maintained than that of the workers, and his hands, though calloused from his own years at the machines before promotion, lack the permanent stains and cuts that mark those who still work directly with the equipment. These subtle distinctions serve as constant reminders of the social distances that separate workers from management, even when that management consists of men who rose from the factory floor themselves. The overseer's ledger contains more than simple productivity measurements. It holds detailed records of each worker's reliability, attitude, family circumstances, and potential for advancement or dismissal. A notation about excessive talking might seem minor, but accumulated over weeks, such marks create a pattern that could justify termination during the next economic downturn, when the factory needs to reduce its workforce. Conversely, consistent notations of punctuality, quality work, and proper deportment might eventually lead to consideration for slightly better positions, or the coveted role of training new workers. The psychological impact of this constant evaluation extends beyond the factory walls into workers' personal lives, affecting how they interact with family members, what risks they're willing to take, and how they plan for an uncertain future. The knowledge that tomorrow's employment depends on today's performance under watchful eyes creates a form of internalized discipline that continues even when the overseer moves to another part of the factory floor. The machinery surrounding you represents a deadly paradox of human ingenuity, magnificent feats of engineering that can transform raw cotton into finished goods with unprecedented speed and efficiency, while simultaneously posing constant threats to the life and limb of anyone unfortunate enough to work alongside them. Do you remember the gentle hum of your carding machine from earlier? That soothing sound masks the presence of thousands of wire teeth spinning at velocities that can strip flesh from bone in milliseconds, each revolution bringing the potential for catastrophic injury to anyone whose attention wavers even momentarily. The massive spinning frames that dominate the factory floor stretch upward like mechanical trees, their branches heavy with hundreds of bobbins that dance in perfect synchronization. These machines operate without guards, protective barriers, or safety mechanisms of any kind. Such additions are considered unnecessary expenses that would reduce efficiency and eat into profit margins. The spinning mechanisms are positioned at various heights, requiring workers to reach over, under, and between moving parts that show no mercy to human flesh that ventures too close to their mechanical appetites. You watch in fascination and horror as experienced workers navigate this mechanical minefield with the grace of dancers, their movements choreographed by months or years of practice that has taught them exactly where each danger lurks. They lean between whirring belts to adjust settings, reach across spinning cylinders to clear blockages, and duck beneath rotating shafts with movements so fluid they appear almost supernatural. Yet even these veterans bear the scars of their expertise: missing fingertips, crooked fingers that have been broken and healed improperly, and arms marked by the distinctive parallel scars that come from accidental contact with moving machinery. The belt-driven power system that runs throughout the factory creates a network of leather straps moving at high speed just above head height, carrying mechanical energy from the central steam engines to individual machines across the floor. These belts are particularly treacherous because they move silently and smoothly, creating an illusion of safety that can prove fatal. Workers who are tall, who stretch to reach something overhead, or who simply stand up too quickly after crouching can find themselves caught by these moving leather serpents that have the strength to drag a full-grown person into the machinery with unstoppable force. The weaving looms present their own catalogue of hazards, their shuttles flying back and forth across the fabric at speeds that create visible blurs in the air. These wooden projectiles, each about the size of a large egg and moving fast enough to cause serious injury, are occasionally break free from their guides and become dangerous missiles that can strike workers anywhere on the factory floor. The loom operators develop reflexes that border on superhuman, able to sense when a shuttle is about to break loose and duck or dodge with split-second timing. That means the difference between minor injury and permanent disability. Oil and water create treacherous conditions underfoot throughout the factory, as the constant lubrication required by the machinery creates a network of slippery surfaces that turn routine movement into potential disaster. The combination of metal filings, cotton waste, and various lubricants creates a paste-like substance that coats walkways and makes secure footing nearly impossible. Workers learn to move with shuffling steps that maintain contact with the floor, never lifting their feet completely as they navigate between machines whose moving parts show no concern for human balance or stability. The factory's ventilation system, such as it exists, proves wholly inadequate for removing the clouds of cotton dust, metal particles, and chemical vapours that fill the air throughout the working day. This toxic atmosphere not only makes breathing difficult, but also creates explosive conditions that every worker understands but rarely discusses. Cotton dust, when suspended in air at sufficient concentration, becomes highly combustible. A single spark from metal striking metal, or even static electricity generated by the machinery, could trigger an explosion that would turn the entire factory into an inferno within seconds. The maintenance of these dangerous machines falls largely to the workers themselves, who must clean, oil, and adjust mechanical components while the machinery continues to operate. Stopping production for maintenance would reduce output and therefore profits. So most mechanical care happens around the edges of the working day, or during brief moments when individual machines can be temporarily shut down. This means workers routinely find themselves reaching into moving machinery to clear jams, adjust settings, or perform minor repairs while belts continue to move and gears continue to turn just inches from their hands and arms. Historians still argue whether the absence of safety equipment in early factories represented a simple lack of engineering knowledge about protective devices, or whether it reflected a calculated decision that human injury was an acceptable cost of maintaining maximum production efficiency. Standing among these unguarded machines, watching workers perform death-defying feats of mechanical ballet simply to earn their daily bread, the economic logic becomes chillingly clear. The sound environment of the factory creates additional dangers beyond the obvious mechanical threats. The constant noise makes verbal communication nearly impossible, meaning that warnings about mechanical problems, falling objects, or other hazards often go unheard. Workers develop a complex system of hand signals and gestures, but these visual communications only work when people are looking in the right direction at the right moment. The deafening mechanical symphony also masks the subtle sound changes that might indicate a machine is about to fail catastrophically, giving workers no advance warning of impending disaster. You notice how the experienced workers position themselves strategically throughout their shifts, always maintaining awareness of multiple escape routes should a machine malfunction or emergency arise. They keep their bodies angled so they can move quickly away from the most dangerous components, and they develop an almost supernatural awareness of the mechanical rhythms around them, able to detect changes in vibration, sound, or movement that might signal trouble brewing in the complex network of moving parts. The factory's lighting system creates its own hazards, as the flickering gas flames cast dancing shadows that can make it difficult to judge distances accurately or spot potential dangers until it's too late to react. The combination of poor lighting and constant motion creates optical illusions that can trick even experienced workers into misjudging the position of moving machinery, leading to accidents that seem to come from nowhere but are actually the predictable result of trying to perform precision work in conditions that would challenge a cat's night vision. Young workers like Thomas face particular dangers because their smaller size allows them to access tight spaces between machines, making them valuable for certain maintenance tasks but also exposing them to risks that larger adults can't even reach. Their inexperience with mechanical dangers, combined with the natural fearlessness of youth, creates a toxic combination that factory owners exploit ruthlessly while bearing no responsibility for the inevitable consequences of placing children in close proximity to unforgiving industrial machinery. The sight of children working alongside adults in this mechanical hellscape represents one of the factory system's most disturbing realities. Small bodies moving between machines that were never designed with human safety in mind, let alone the protection of those who should be playing in schoolyards rather than dodging industrial hazards for 12 hours a day. You watch as 6-year-old Mary scurries beneath a massive spinning frame to retrieve fallen bobbins, her tiny frame allowing her to navigate spaces that would trap an adult, while her inexperience with machinery makes every movement a potential catastrophe waiting to unfold. These child workers, euphemistically called piecers and doffers by management, perform tasks that capitalise on their small size and nimble fingers, while exposing them to dangers that would horrify any reasonable adult. Mary's job requires her to crawl under moving machinery to tie together broken cotton threads, a task that demands she place her small hands within inches of gears, belts, and spinning mechanisms that could crush or sever her fingers without even slowing their relentless mechanical rhythm. The work pays her exactly 3 shillings per week, barely enough to contribute meaningfully to her family's survival, but desperately needed income nonetheless. The factory's employment of children follows a grotesque economic logic that transforms childhood itself into a commodity to be bought and sold in the marketplace. Children's wages are significantly lower than adults. Young Thomas, at 16, earns roughly half what Mrs. Jenkins makes despite working identical hours under identical conditions. This wage differential creates powerful incentives for factory owners to employ as many children as possible, while simultaneously ensuring that families desperate enough to send their offspring into industrial labour remain trapped in cycles of poverty that make such desperate choices seem rational. You observe the cruel efficiency with which children are integrated into the mechanical workflow, their small bodies treated as living tools designed to access spaces and perform tasks that adult workers cannot manage. Little Sarah, barely tall enough to reach the middle sections of the carding machines, stands on a wooden box that raises her just high enough to feed cotton into the mechanism, while keeping her face dangerously close to the moving metal teeth that process the fibres. The box itself represents a hazard. If she loses her balance and falls, she could easily become entangled in the very machinery she's trying to operate. The children develop their own survival strategies within this industrial nightmare, forming informal networks of mutual protection and information sharing that help them navigate dangers their adult supervisors often ignore or overlook. They learn to communicate through glances and gestures, warning each other about mechanical problems, approaching supervisors, or other hazards that threaten their already precarious safety. These children possess a street wisdom born of necessity, understanding industrial dangers with an acuity that would be impressive if it weren't so tragic. The physical toll of factory work on developing bodies becomes apparent within weeks of employment. As children develop the characteristic posture and movements that mark long-time industrial workers, their spines begin to curve from hours of bending over machines. Their hands become permanently stained with cotton oil and metal dust, and their growth appears stunted by the combination of poor nutrition and physical demands that exceed what growing bodies can reasonably sustain. Most disturbingly, they begin to move with the mechanical precision of the adults around them, their natural childhood spontaneity replaced by the calculated movements necessary for survival in an environment designed to eliminate unpredictability. The educational opportunities these children sacrifice by working in the factory represent a form of generational theft that extends far beyond immediate economic exploitation. Mary should be learning to read and write, developing mathematical skills, and exploring the world of ideas that might eventually lift her family out of poverty. Instead, she spends her formative years learning the specialized skills of cotton production, knowledge that will serve her only as long as the textile industry remains profitable and only if she manages to avoid the accidents that regularly claim workers' fingers, hands, and lives. Factory owners justify child employment through a complex web of rationalizations that transform exploitation into apparent charity. They claim to be providing valuable training and work experience that will benefit children throughout their lives, conveniently ignoring the fact that factory work requires no transferable skills beyond the ability to endure repetitive motion and dangerous conditions. They argue that factory wages help support struggling families, failing to acknowledge that adult workers might earn living wages if not for the availability of cheaper child labour that undercuts everyone's earning potential. The legal framework surrounding child labour in 1850s Britain provides minimal protection, with regulations that are rarely enforced and easily circumvented by factory owners who understand that government inspectors visit infrequently and can be evaded through temporary reassignment of the youngest workers to less visible tasks during official visits. Children as young as 9 can legally work in textile factories, while younger children often find employment through informal arrangements that exist entirely outside any regulatory oversight. Historians still argue whether early industrial child labour represented a necessary stage in economic development that eventually led to improved living standards for all social classes, or whether it constituted a form of institutionalised child abuse that sacrificed an entire generation's well-being for the profit of factory owners and investors. Watching young Mary navigate between machines that could kill her instantly, seeing the exhaustion in Thomas's eyes after just a few hours of work, the moral calculus seems devastatingly clear. The factory's meal arrangements for children reveal additional layers of exploitation disguised as benevolence. Child workers receive slightly smaller food rations during the brief meal breaks, ostensibly because their smaller bodies require less nutrition, but actually because reduced food costs improve profit margins while maintaining the fiction that the factory cares about worker welfare. Many children arrive at work without having eaten breakfast, and some will go to bed tonight having consumed nothing but the meagre portions provided during factory meal breaks. You notice how the adult workers attempt to protect the children when possible, sharing their own food, offering quiet words of encouragement, and sometimes positioning themselves to shield the youngest workers from the worst harassment by supervisors, Mrs. Jenkins keeps a protective eye on Mary, occasionally helping her reach difficult areas or warning her about approaching dangers, though such assistance must be carefully concealed to avoid penalties for both helper and helped. The social dynamics among child workers mirror the broader factory hierarchy, with older children exercising authority over younger ones, and those with more experience commanding respect from newcomers regardless of age. These relationships provide some structure and support within the chaotic industrial environment, though they also replicate the same power imbalances and potential for exploitation that characterize adult workplace relationships. The psychological impact of factory work on children extends beyond the obvious physical dangers to encompass the premature loss of childhood innocence and wonder that comes from daily exposure to adult concerns about wages, workplace politics, and economic survival. These children develop adult anxieties about employment security and family finances, while still possessing childlike bodies and emotional development, creating internal tensions that manifest in behavioural problems both at work and at home. The air you breathe has transformed from a life-sustaining necessity into a toxic cocktail that coats your lungs with each inhalation, leaving you constantly aware of the foreign substances settling into your respiratory system, like industrial snow that never melts and never provides relief from its suffocating presence. The cotton fibres floating through the atmosphere create a visible haze that catches and reflects the gaslight, giving the entire factory floor an almost ethereal quality that would be beautiful if it weren't slowly poisoning everyone who works within these brick walls that have become both workplace and tomb for countless workers over the decades. Each breath delivers microscopic particles of cotton, metal dust, and chemical residues deep into your lungs, where they will accumulate over months and years until breathing itself becomes a laborious effort that reminds you constantly of your industrial servitude and the price your body pays for earning daily wages. The particulates settle in the delicate alveoli where oxygen exchange should occur naturally, creating inflammatory responses that will eventually scar the lung tissue and reduce your breathing capacity to a fraction of what nature intended for human respiratory function. The factory's ventilation system consists primarily of a few high windows that can be opened during warmer months, though even this minimal fresh air circulation is often sacrificed when outdoor temperatures make heating costs prohibitive for factory owners who consider worker comfort an unnecessary luxury that reduces profit margins. The windows remain sealed during winter months, trapping the toxic atmosphere inside the building like a slowly tightening noose around every worker's throat, creating a sealed environment where industrial pollutants concentrate to levels that would shock modern safety inspectors if they could witness these conditions firsthand. The air grows progressively thicker throughout each working day as hundreds of machines generate cotton dust in clouds so dense they sometimes obscure workers from view, while massive steam engines pour coal smoke and chemical vapours into the already compromised atmosphere that serves as the only breathing medium available to trapped workers. By afternoon, the accumulated particulates create a visible fog that hangs at shoulder height, forcing workers to duck beneath the worst concentrations while trying to maintain their productivity at machines designed without any consideration for human respiratory needs. You taste the metallic tang of iron filings on your tongue constantly, tiny particles shed by machinery operating at dangerous speeds. Mixing with the organic sweetness of cotton fibres and the acrid bite of machine oil to create a flavour profile that defines industrial labour and marks you as clearly as a brand marks cattle belonging to a particular owner. The taste becomes so familiar that fresh, clean air begins to seem strange and almost empty by comparison, lacking the complex bouquet of industrial toxins that your palate has learned to expect during every waking hour spent within these walls. Workers develop their own specialised terminology for different types of air quality, based on years of experience breathing these industrial cocktails. Heavy days when the dust hangs thick and visible like fog rolling off the ocean. Sharp days when metal particles seem particularly concentrated and cause throat pain with each inhalation. And burning days when chemical fumes make eyes water uncontrollably and throats burn with each breath, drawn in desperation for oxygen that never comes pure or clean. The cotton dust creates its own distinct microclimate within the factory, settling on every surface and creating a fine white coating that transforms the industrial landscape into something resembling a winter scene painted by an artist with a particularly morbid imagination and an obsession with depicting industrial death. The dust accumulates on windowsills, machinery, workers' hair and clothing, and even eyelashes and eyebrows, creating an almost surreal atmosphere where everything takes on a ghostly flour-dusted appearance that would be comical if it weren't so deadly to human health and longevity. This seemingly innocent white powder represents one of the factory's most insidious killers, causing a condition that workers euphemistically call mill fever, but doctors are beginning to recognize as a serious respiratory disease that can prove fatal over years of exposure to concentrations that exceed what human lungs can process and eliminate naturally. The cotton fibres lodge in lung tissue and create chronic inflammation that gradually destroys the respiratory system's ability to function effectively, leading to premature death that factory owners dismiss as unrelated to working conditions. The chemical vapours arise from multiple sources throughout the factory complex, the various oils used to lubricate hundreds of moving parts that would seize without constant application of petroleum-based products. The dyes employed in textile processes that transform white cotton into colourful fabrics demanded by consumers who never consider the human cost of their clothing choices, and most significantly, the massive quantities of coal burned continuously to power the steam engines that drive the entire mechanical symphony of industrial production. These fumes create a complex atmospheric chemistry that varies throughout each day as different industrial processes operate at different intensities and create their own unique toxic signatures that experienced workers learn to recognize and fear. Morning air might be heavy with coal smoke from engines, building steam pressure for the day's production, creating a choking atmosphere that makes the start of each workday feel like entering a coal mine. Afternoon air becomes saturated with cotton dust as machinery reaches peak operational levels, and fibre processing creates maximum atmospheric contamination that reduces visibility and makes breathing a conscious effort rather than an automatic bodily function. Evening brings its own chemical cocktail as cleaning solvents and maintenance oils add their distinctive odours to the already compromised breathing medium that workers must endure regardless of personal preference or health concerns that seem irrelevant compared to immediate economic survival needs. The combination creates an atmosphere so toxic that newcomers often vomit during their first week of employment, though veteran workers dismiss such reactions as weakness rather than natural responses to poisonous air quality. You watch workers develop their own adaptive strategies for managing the toxic atmosphere. From breathing through makeshift cloth filters fashioned from scraps of cotton fabric, to positioning themselves strategically near the few sources of marginally cleaner air when supervisors aren't monitoring their movements for signs of inefficiency or insubordination. Some workers learn to breathe more shallowly during particularly dusty operations, reducing the volume of contaminated air entering their lungs while maintaining sufficient oxygen for continued work performance that meets production quotas, regardless of personal health costs. Others develop elaborate techniques for clearing their throats and nasal passages that become unconscious habits performed hundreds of times throughout each shift, creating a constant background symphony of coughing, spitting, and throat clearing that provides the human soundtrack to mechanical production. These sounds become so common that their absence would seem strange, though they represent clear evidence of respiratory distress that goes unaddressed by management focused solely on productivity measurements and profit calculations. The most experienced workers can predict air quality changes with remarkable accuracy based on machine operations. Weather patterns and seasonal variations that affect the factory's minimal ventilation effectiveness in ways that determine whether a particular day will be merely unpleasant or genuinely dangerous for human respiratory health. They learn to recognize the subtle signs that indicate when atmospheric conditions will deteriorate beyond even their adapted tolerance levels, allowing them to take whatever minimal protective measures their circumstances permit while continuing to meet production quotas that ignore human biological limitations entirely. Brief moments of human connection pierce through the mechanical monotony like shafts of sunlight breaking through storm clouds, offering precious reminders that you and your fellow workers remain human beings, despite the factory system's determined efforts to reduce you to mere components in its industrial machinery. These stolen exchanges of glances, whispered words, and shared gestures create an underground network of solidarity that management fears more than any mechanical breakdown, because human connection represents the one force that cannot be bought, controlled, or eliminated through fines and surveillance. You catch Mrs. Jenkins' eye as she adjusts her position at the neighbouring carding machine, and in that brief moment of contact, an entire conversation passes between you without words. Her slight nod acknowledges your struggle with a particularly tangled batch of cotton, while her barely perceptible smile offers encouragement that you're managing the work adequately despite your relative inexperience. These micro-communications develop their own sophisticated vocabulary among factory workers, allowing complex information to be shared under the watchful eyes of supervisors who understand the mechanical aspects of production but remain largely oblivious to the subtle human dramas unfolding around them. The timing of these human connections requires careful orchestration, as workers learn to synchronize their brief moments of social contact with the natural rhythms of machinery and supervision that create tiny windows of opportunity for authentic interaction. When Mr. Hartwell turns his attention to the far end of the factory floor, a ripple of relaxed conversation spreads among the workers like water flowing downhill, though everyone remains alert for his return and ready to resume their mask of mechanical compliance at a moment's notice. Young Thomas catches your attention with a barely visible gesture toward his machine, which has developed a slight grinding noise that could indicate serious mechanical trouble requiring immediate attention from the maintenance crew. The information passes through hand signals and meaningful glances from worker to worker until it reaches Mrs. Jenkins, whose 15 years of experience have taught her to distinguish between normal machine variations and genuine problems that could result in dangerous failures or costly production delays. The sharing of this mechanical intelligence represents more than simple workplace cooperation. It demonstrates the workers' collective understanding that their survival depends not just on individual performance, but on the smooth functioning of the entire industrial system that employs them. A major machine breakdown could result in temporary layoffs for entire sections of workers, making mechanical problems everyone's concern regardless of which specific station experiences the difficulty. These brief human connections also serve as lifelines for workers struggling with the psychological challenges of industrial labour that reduce human beings to extensions of mechanical processes. A quick word of encouragement from an experienced worker can mean the difference between persevering through a difficult day and breaking down under the relentless pressure of maintaining inhuman productivity levels while breathing poisonous air and operating dangerous machinery for 12 consecutive hours. You observe how different workers navigate the delicate balance between maintaining necessary human contact and avoiding the scrutiny that such contact attracts from supervisors trained to interpret any social interaction as potential insubordination or conspiracy against factory discipline. Some workers, like Mrs. Jenkins, have perfected the art of appearing completely focused on their mechanical tasks while simultaneously maintaining awareness of their colleagues' needs and offering subtle assistance when circumstances permit. Others, particularly younger workers like Mary and Thomas, struggle with the isolation imposed by factory discipline and sometimes risk penalties by engaging in conversations that exceed the brief. Work-related exchanges that supervisors consider acceptable. These young workers often haven't yet developed the sophisticated communication skills that allow veteran employees to maintain human connection while appearing to conform completely to management expectations. The factory's social ecosystem operates according to unwritten rules that govern not just when and how workers can interact, but what topics are safe for discussion and which subjects should result in immediate dismissal if overheard by the wrong person. Complaints about working conditions, discussions of wages compared to other factories, and especially any mention of collective action to improve circumstances are absolutely forbidden topics that could result in blacklisting from employment throughout the entire industrial district. Historians still argue whether these networks of worker solidarity represented early forms of labour organisation that would eventually lead to formal unions and collective bargaining, or whether they simply constituted survival mechanisms that allowed individuals to endure impossible conditions without necessarily challenging the fundamental structure of industrial exploitation. The evidence suggests both interpretations contain truth, as human connection serves immediate psychological needs while also creating the social bonds necessary for eventual collective action. The sharing of food during brief meal breaks creates particularly powerful moments of human connection that transcend the usual boundaries of age, experience, and social background that separate different categories of workers. Mrs. Jenkins occasionally shares portions of her modest lunch with young Mary, whose family cannot always afford to send adequate food for a 12-hour workday, creating bonds of generosity and gratitude that exist entirely outside the factory's official economic relationships. These acts of mutual aid occur despite the fact that every worker's food supply represents a carefully calculated balance between nutritional needs and economic constraints, making the decision to share with others a genuine sacrifice that demonstrates the persistence of human compassion even in circumstances designed to eliminate such generous impulses. The sharing creates obligations and relationships that extend beyond the factory walls into the broader community of industrial workers and their families. You notice how workers develop their own informal systems for supporting colleagues who face particular challenges, whether from difficult machine assignments, family problems that affect work performance, or simple inexperience that makes meeting production quotas more challenging. This support rarely involves direct intervention that might be observed by supervisors, but rather takes the form of subtle adjustments in work patterns, strategic positioning to provide assistance when needed, and the sharing of specialized knowledge about machine operation and maintenance. The knowledge sharing represents a particularly important form of human connection, as experienced workers pass along the hard-won expertise that can mean the difference between successful adaptation to factory life and dangerous accidents that could end careers or lives. Mrs. Jenkins quietly teaches you techniques for reading the subtle signs that indicate when your carding machine requires adjustment, knowledge that could prevent costly breakdowns and the severe penalties that accompany mechanical failures. This transfer of practical wisdom occurs entirely outside any formal training programs, as factory owners prefer to minimize training costs by hiring workers who can quickly adapt to mechanical requirements through trial and error rather than systematic instruction. The informal education system that develops among workers themselves becomes a crucial survival mechanism that allows newcomers to acquire essential skills while avoiding the worst hazards of industrial employment. The emotional support that workers provide for each other becomes particularly evident during the afternoon hours when fatigue, heat, and atmospheric toxins combine to create conditions that test human endurance beyond reasonable limits. A reassuring glance from an experienced colleague can provide the motivation necessary to continue working when every instinct screams for rest. While a shared moment of quiet humour can transform unbearable circumstances into something approaching tolerable, the dinner bell's harsh clang cuts through the mechanical symphony like a sword through silk, triggering an immediate transformation as hundreds of workers simultaneously abandon their stations and rush toward the cramped spaces designated for meal consumption. You feel the desperate urgency that drives this mass migration. 30 minutes represents the only respite in a 12-hour shift, making every second precious beyond calculation. The transition from mechanical precision to human chaos happens in moments, as workers who have been moving in perfect synchronization with machinery suddenly become individuals again, each racing against time to obtain whatever nourishment and rest these brief minutes might provide. The eating area consists of a series of long wooden tables arranged in a space barely adequate for half the number of workers who must somehow find room to consume their meagre meals. The tables, stained with years of spilled food and scarred by countless knives cutting through bread and cheese, provide the only surfaces available for the ritual of eating that connects workers to their humanity during this brief intermission from industrial servitude. You squeeze onto a bench between Mrs. Jenkins and a weaver whose name you don't know. your body grateful for the opportunity to sit after hours of standing at your carding machine. The food you extract from your tin lunch pail represents a careful calculation of nutrition, cost, and portability that reflects the harsh economic realities of industrial employment. A thick slice of brown bread, a small piece of hard cheese, and perhaps an apple if the family budget permits. These simple items must provide sufficient energy to sustain 12 hours of physical labour while costing little enough to leave money for rent, clothing, and other necessities that compete for your meagre wages. The bread has absorbed the factory's atmospheric toxins during the morning hours, giving it a faintly metallic taste that mingles unpleasantly with its natural flavours. Around you, the social dynamics of factory life play out in miniature as workers navigate the complex etiquette of shared meal spaces under time pressure that makes every interaction brief and purposeful. Conversations focus on practical matters: which machines are running poorly, rumours about potential layoffs or new hirings, and occasional whispered discussions of wages and working conditions that must be conducted with constant awareness of potential eavesdropping by supervisors who sometimes patrol the eating area to monitor worker morale and identify potential troublemakers. The sharing of food during these meals creates bonds that extend far beyond simple economic transaction, as workers with slightly more resources quietly support those whose circumstances have left them with inadequate nutrition for the physical demands of industrial labour. Mrs. Jenkins breaks off a portion of her cheese and slides it casually toward young Thomas, whose pale complexion and trembling hands suggest insufficient food intake for someone performing demanding physical work. These acts of generosity occur without acknowledgement or expectation of reciprocation, representing pure human compassion that persists despite systematic efforts to reduce workers to mere mechanical components. You observe how different workers approach the challenge of maximizing nutrition and satisfaction within the constraints of limited time and resources. Some bolt their food quickly to allow maximum time for rest, while others eat more slowly to extend the pleasure of tasting something other than industrial air and cotton dust. The more experienced workers have learned to pace their consumption to avoid the stomach cramps that can result from eating too quickly after hours of physical exertion, while newcomers often make themselves sick by attempting to consume inadequate food too rapidly. The conversations during meal breaks reveal the rich inner lives that workers maintain despite the factory system's efforts to suppress individual identity in favour of mechanical conformity. Mrs. Jenkins speaks quietly about her daughter's progress in school, expressing hopes that education might provide an escape route from industrial employment for the next generation. Thomas shares news from his rural village, where his family maintains a small garden that occasionally provides fresh vegetables to supplement the industrial diet of preserved foods and cheap starches. These personal revelations create intimate moments of human connection that contrast sharply with the impersonal nature of mechanical work, allowing workers to remember that their identities extend beyond their roles as operators of carding machines, spinners, and weavers. The sharing of personal information requires trust and vulnerability that develops slowly among people whose economic survival depends on avoiding conflicts or misunderstandings that could affect their employment status. The physical relief of sitting down becomes almost overwhelming after hours of standing on hard floors while maintaining the precise postures required for efficient machine operation. Your feet compressed in ill-fitting boots that represent the best footwear your wages can afford begin to regain sensation as blood circulation improves. Your back, curved from leaning over the carding machine, slowly straightens as muscles that have been locked in position for hours finally receive permission to relax into more natural configurations. The acoustic environment during meal breaks provides blessed relief from the constant mechanical noise that has been assaulting your eardrums since before dawn. The relative quiet allows for actual conversation at normal speaking volumes, though the silence feels strange and almost unsettling after hours of adaptation. to the industrial symphony that never ceases during working hours. You can hear birds singing outside the windows, a reminder that nature continues to exist beyond the factory walls. Though such sounds seem to come from another world entirely, historians still argue whether these brief meal breaks represented genuine concern for worker welfare or simply calculated measures to maintain productivity by preventing complete physical breakdown among the workforce. The evidence suggests both motivations operated simultaneously. As factory owners discovered that small investments in worker sustenance could yield significant returns in sustained productivity levels throughout extended shifts that would otherwise result in declining output as workers approached physical exhaustion. The variety of food brought by different workers reflects the economic stratification that exists even among the industrial working class, as slightly better wages or additional family income sources allow some workers to afford more nutritious and appealing meals. The spinners, whose skilled work commands marginally higher wages, often bring small luxuries like butter for their bread or occasionally a piece of fruit, while the lowest paid workers sometimes survive on bread alone, supplemented by whatever charity their colleagues can quietly provide. The time pressure that governs meal breaks creates its own form of stress, as workers must balance their need for nutrition against their need for rest while constantly aware that the resumption of work approaches with mechanical inevitability. Some workers use portions of their mealtime to attend to personal needs like mending clothes or cleaning hands and faces, while others close their eyes and attempt to achieve a few minutes of genuine rest that might restore some small portion of their depleted physical and mental energy. The social hierarchies that govern factory floor relationships continue to operate during meal breaks, though in modified forms that allow for slightly more egalitarian interaction while still maintaining the distinctions between experienced and novice workers, skilled and unskilled positions, and adult and child employees, misses. Jenkins commands respect during meals just as she does during working hours. Though her authority expresses itself through gentle guidance and protection, rather than the competitive dynamics that characterize relationships during production time, the scream that pierces through the mechanical din freezes everyone in place for a split second before training takes over and workers react with the swift efficiency that comes from witnessing such horrors far too often. You watch as the spinning frame operator 2 rows away staggers backward from her machine, clutching her right hand against her body while blood seeps between her fingers and drips steadily onto the cotton dust-covered floor. The machine continues its relentless spinning, indifferent to the human flesh it has just claimed, its metal teeth now decorated with bright red droplets that will be someone's job to clean away once the immediate crisis passes. Misses. Jenkins moves toward the injured woman with practiced urgency, pulling a relatively clean cloth from her apron pocket. Every experienced worker carries such supplies, knowing that accidents are not possibilities but certainties in this mechanical landscape where human flesh regularly encounters unforgiving metal at dangerous speeds. The injured woman, Sarah from the village of Littleworth, sits heavily on a nearby stool while Mrs. Jenkins carefully examines the damage with the clinical detachment of someone who has performed this assessment many times before. 3 fingers on Sarah's right hand have been severely crushed by the spinning machinery, the bone visible through torn flesh that will never heal properly without medical attention the factory doesn't provide and Sarah cannot afford. The middle finger hangs at an unnatural angle, clearly broken in multiple places, while the other 2 show deep lacerations that will leave permanent scars and probably result in reduced dexterity that could affect her ability to perform precision work in the future. The sight makes your stomach lurch, though you force yourself to look because understanding these dangers might help you avoid similar fate, mister. Hartwell appears within minutes, His primary concern focused not on Sarah's injuries but on the production disruption caused by her accident and the blood that now stains both the machinery and the cotton it was processing. He makes notes in his leather-bound ledger, documenting the time lost, the material contaminated, and the mechanical inspection that will be required before the spinning frame can resume operation. Sarah's pain and future disability register as secondary concerns compared to the immediate economic impact of interrupted production schedules. The cleanup begins even before Sarah's wounds are properly addressed. As other workers are assigned to remove blood-stained cotton and wipe down the mechanical components with rags that will themselves become contaminated waste requiring disposal, the factory's priority lies in resuming normal operations as quickly as possible. Treating human injury as just another form of mechanical breakdown that must be repaired efficiently to minimize production losses and maintain profit margins that depend on consistent output, regardless of human costs. You notice the dark stains on the wooden flooring around several other machines. Previous accidents that have left permanent marks like a ghoulish map of industrial violence recorded in dried blood and tissue that no amount of cleaning can completely remove. These stains serve as constant reminders of the dangers surrounding every worker. Though the human mind's capacity for adaptation means that most workers learn to ignore these warnings in order to function psychologically within an environment that would otherwise prove unbearable. The other workers continue their tasks with barely a pause. Having learned through bitter experience that showing too much concern for injured colleagues can result in penalties for disrupting production or displaying attitudes that management considers detrimental to workplace efficiency. The mechanical rhythm of the factory resumes within minutes, swallowing Sarah's screams beneath the familiar symphony of spinning bobbins, carding machines, and steam engines that acknowledge no human tragedy as sufficient reason to slow their relentless pace. Sarah is helped to her feet and escorted toward the factory's medical station, a generous term for a small room containing basic bandages and a bottle of whiskey that serves as the only anaesthetic available for treating industrial injuries. The company doctor, when he can be located, possesses minimal training and even less interest in providing thorough care for workers whose injuries might require expensive treatment or time away from productive labour that reduces overall factory output. The financial implications of Sarah's accident extend far beyond immediate medical costs to encompass lost wages during recovery, potential permanent disability that would end her factory career, and the family disruption that occurs when a primary wage earner becomes unable to work. Sarah supports 3 younger siblings and an elderly mother on her factory wages, an economic burden that will now fall entirely on other family members or result in genuine destitution that could prove fatal during the coming winter months. Historians still argue whether the high accident rates in early factories represented unfortunate but unavoidable consequences of pioneering industrial technology, or whether they reflected deliberate management decisions to prioritise profit over worker safety in situations where proper safeguards could have prevented most injuries. The evidence suggests that factory owners understood the dangers, but calculated that the costs of safety equipment exceeded the economic value they placed on worker welfare and longevity. The psychological impact of witnessing such accidents affects different workers in various ways, from the veteran employees who have developed emotional calluses protecting them from excessive empathy, to newcomers like yourself who must somehow process the reality that similar injuries await anyone whose attention wavers or whose luck runs out during the endless hours of dangerous mechanical interaction. The knowledge that today's victim could easily be tomorrow's casualty creates a constant underlying tension that mingles with fatigue and chemical exposure to produce a mental state that borders on chronic trauma. Young Thomas appears particularly shaken by Sarah's accident, his hands trembling more noticeably as he attempts to maintain his work rhythm while processing the visual evidence of what industrial machinery can do to human flesh when circumstances align unfavourably. His inexperience makes him more vulnerable to similar accidents. while his youth makes the sight of permanent disability particularly horrifying as he contemplates decades of future exposure to identical dangers with no guarantee of avoiding Sarah's fate or worse. The factory's accident reporting system operates primarily to protect management from legal liability rather than to improve worker safety, with incident reports focusing on worker error and mechanical malfunction while rarely acknowledging systemic problems like inadequate lighting, excessive noise levels, or fatigue-inducing work schedules that contribute to increased accident rates. Sarah's injury will likely be attributed to carelessness or inattention, rather than the unsafe working conditions that make such accidents statistically inevitable. You observe how quickly the bloodstains are cleaned and the machinery inspected, with production resuming before Sarah has even left the factory floor for medical attention. The spinning frame that claimed her fingers roars back to life with mechanical indifference, ready to claim the next worker who ventures too close to its unguarded mechanisms or whose reflexes prove insufficient to avoid contact with moving parts designed without consideration for human safety requirements. The other workers gradually return to their normal rhythms and conversations, though an undercurrent of increased tension affects everyone's movements for the remainder of the shift. Accidents serve as unwelcome reminders of the dangers that surround every aspect of factory work, temporarily breaking through the psychological defenses that allow people to function in an environment where permanent injury or death represents a daily possibility rather than a remote theoretical concern. The economic mathematics of industrial accidents become clear as you calculate the human costs against the potential expenses of safety improvements that factory owners consistently reject as economically unjustified. Each worker represents an easily replaceable component in the industrial system, making individual safety less valuable than the production efficiency that safety equipment might compromise through reduced speed or increased complexity of machine operation. The afternoon hours stretch before you like an endless desert of mechanical repetition, your body screaming protests that grow louder with each passing minute as fatigue accumulates in muscles never designed to maintain identical motions for such extended periods. Do you remember the fresh energy you felt when first taking your position at the carding machine this morning? That vitality has been systematically drained by 7 hours of standing, reaching, lifting, and coordinating movements with mechanical precision that allows no variation, no rest, and no mercy for human biological limitations that mean nothing to the relentless demands of industrial production schedules. Your feet have progressed beyond mere aching to a state of burning agony that shoots up through your legs with every step. The ill-fitting boots that represent the best footwear your wages can afford, having compressed your toes and raised blisters that break and reform throughout the long hours of standing on floors that provide no cushioning against the constant pressure of supporting your body weight while performing physical labour. The wooden planks beneath your feet, worn smooth by countless thousands of workers before you, offer no relief from the hardness that seems to penetrate through shoe leather and into your very bones. The heat that builds throughout the day has reached the point where sweat pours constantly from your forehead, stinging your eyes and carrying with it the cotton dust and metal particles that coat every surface in the factory, creating a grimy mixture that turns your skin into a canvas painted with the residue of industrial production. Your clothes cling to your body with dampness that never fully dries, the fabric heavy with moisture and chemical odours that have permeated the fibres until they feel like a second skin made of industrial waste and human desperation. The repetitive motions required by your carding machine have created a burning sensation in your shoulders and arms that grows more intense with each hour. Muscles locked in positions that nature never intended for such extended periods. Your right arm, which feeds cotton into the mechanical teeth, has developed a tremor that makes precision work increasingly difficult as the afternoon progresses. while your left arm aches from the constant motion of guiding processed slivers into collection containers that must be positioned with exact precision to avoid waste that could result in penalties deducted from your already meagre wages. The noise that seemed overwhelming this morning has now reached levels that make communication impossible and thinking difficult, as the combination of hundreds of machines operating at peak capacity creates a wall of sound that penetrates not just your ears, but your entire body, vibrating in your chest cavity and making your teeth ache with the constant mechanical percussion. The din includes not just the primary sounds of carding machines, spinning frames, and steam engines, but a symphony of secondary noises, belts slapping against pulleys, metal components grinding against each other, and the occasional sharp crack of something breaking under the stress of continuous operation. Your eyes burn from the combination of poor lighting and constant exposure to airborne particles that create an almost fog-like atmosphere, making it increasingly difficult to judge distances accurately or spot potential problems before they develop into dangerous situations. The gas jets that provide illumination flicker and dance in ways that create optical illusions, making stationary objects appear to move and moving objects appear to blur into incomprehensible shapes that challenge your ability to work safely around machinery whose tolerance for human error remains exactly zero. The mental fatigue may be even more debilitating than the physical exhaustion, as your mind struggles to maintain the constant vigilance required to operate dangerous machinery while your attention span deteriorates under the combined assault of noise, heat, toxic air, and the soul-crushing monotony of performing identical motions thousands of times without variation or intellectual engagement. Your thoughts begin to wander, despite the dangers such distraction represents, leading to the kinds of momentary lapses in attention that result in accidents like the one that claimed Sarah's fingers earlier in the day. You watch Mrs. Jenkins maintain her work rhythm with the steady determination of someone who has learned to pace herself for the long haul, though even her experienced efficiency shows signs of strain as the afternoon heat and accumulated fatigue begin to take their toll on her 15 years of factory endurance. Her movements remain precise, but have lost some of their earlier fluidity, replaced by the mechanical precision of someone whose body continues to function through pure force of will while her energy reserves approach depletion. Young Thomas appears to be struggling more visibly with the afternoon challenge, his inexperienced body rebelling against demands that exceed what his rural upbringing prepared him to endure. His face has taken on the pale, drawn appearance that marks workers approaching their physical limits, while his hands shake more noticeably as he attempts to maintain feeding rhythms that require steadiness he no longer possesses. The sight fills you with both sympathy for his suffering and fear for your own ability to endure similar challenges as the hours continue their relentless progression. The factory's atmosphere grows increasingly oppressive as the afternoon progresses, with accumulated heat from machinery and human bodies combining with the ever-present chemical vapours to create conditions that would challenge healthy individuals under the best circumstances, let alone workers who've been breathing industrial toxins for 7 hours while performing physically demanding labour. The air itself seems to thicken, making each breath a conscious effort rather than the automatic function that breathing should represent. Historians still argue whether the 12-hour industrial workday represented a necessary phase in economic development that eventually led to improved living standards, or whether it constituted a form of systematic human exploitation that sacrificed worker health and longevity for immediate profit maximization. Standing in the oppressive afternoon heat, feeling your body's increasingly desperate protests against continued abuse, the moral calculation seems devastatingly clear. The social dynamics among workers shift subtly during these afternoon hours as individual survival instincts begin to override the collaborative spirit that characterizes earlier portions of the shift. Workers become more focused on their own immediate challenges and less able to provide mutual support. Though the most experienced employees like Mrs. Jenkins continue to monitor their colleagues for signs of dangerous fatigue or distress that could result in accidents affecting everyone's safety and productivity. You notice how the pace of work inevitably slows during these challenging hours. Though workers must disguise this natural response to fatigue to avoid penalties for reduced productivity that supervisors monitor constantly throughout the shift, the art lies in maintaining sufficient output to avoid official notice while allowing your body whatever minimum relief can be achieved without triggering management intervention that could result in fines, punishment assignments, or termination of employment. The afternoon light streaming through the tall windows creates harsh contrasts between bright areas near the glass and deep shadows around machinery, adding visual stress to the other challenges that accumulate throughout the extended shift. The natural light, filtered through industrial haze and window glass coated with years of accumulated grime, provides inadequate illumination for precision work while creating glare that strains eyes already irritated by chemical exposure and airborne particles. The mechanical sounds that provide the constant soundtrack to factory life begin to take on almost hallucinatory qualities as fatigue affects your perception, making normal industrial noises seem louder, more threatening, or occasionally transforming them into sounds that aren't actually present, but seem real enough to cause momentary confusion or distraction. This auditory distortion represents one of the many ways prolonged exposure to extreme working conditions affects human sensory processing and judgment. The evening bell finally pierces through the mechanical cacophony like a salvation bell tolling from some distant cathedral, though the sweet sound of liberation carries bitter undertones as you realize how completely the 12-hour shift has drained your physical and mental reserves. Your legs tremble as you step away from the carding machine that has been your mechanical master throughout this endless day. Muscles that have been locked in working positions for so many hours that they initially refuse to respond properly to commands for different movements. The simple act of walking becomes a conscious effort requiring concentration, as feet compressed in inadequate boots and legs strained by constant standing struggle to carry you toward the factory gates that represent the boundary between industrial servitude and whatever limited freedom the evening hours might provide. The mass exodus toward the exit creates a human tide that flows with desperate urgency, despite the obvious exhaustion that marks every worker's movement. Hundreds of people united by their shared need to escape the toxic atmosphere and mechanical demands that have consumed their day. You move with the crowd, feeling the press of bodies around you, some stumbling from fatigue, others moving with the mechanical precision that 12 hours of factory discipline has ingrained so deeply that it continues even after the machines have stopped claiming their time and energy. The ringing in your ears continues long after the machinery has fallen silent, a persistent reminder of the acoustic assault your hearing has endured throughout the shift that will follow you home and possibly haunt your dreams with phantom industrial sounds that seem to echo from the very walls of your consciousness. The sudden relative quiet feels almost unnatural after 12 hours of constant mechanical noise, creating an eerie atmosphere where normal sounds like footsteps and conversations seem both too loud and strangely distant. Your hands, stained with cotton oil and metal dust that no amount of washing will completely remove, bear the permanent marks of industrial labour that identify you as clearly as any uniform or badge could indicate your social position in the economic hierarchy. The chemicals have penetrated your skin, leaving discolorations and rough patches that will serve as lifelong reminders of your participation in the industrial system that transforms human beings into extensions of mechanical processes designed for profit rather than human welfare. The taste of cotton dust and metal filings lingers in your mouth despite your desperate thirst for clean water that might wash away the industrial flavours that have coated your tongue and throat throughout the day. Your saliva has taken on a gritty texture that makes swallowing uncomfortable, while your throat feels raw from breathing air that contained more industrial toxins than oxygen for 12 consecutive hours. The prospect of fresh air beyond the factory walls seems almost too wonderful to believe. Though you know the outdoor atmosphere will provide only marginal improvement in an industrial district where dozens of other factories contribute their own pollution to the regional environment. Mrs. Jenkins walks beside you with the steady gait of someone who has made this journey thousands of times before, though even her experienced endurance shows signs of strain in the slight stoop that has developed in her shoulders and the careful way she places her feet to accommodate whatever foot problems 15 years of factory work have created. She offers a tired smile that acknowledges your shared survival of another day's industrial ordeal, though her eyes reflect the same exhaustion that you feel settling into your bones like lead weights that will make even simple tasks seem monumentally difficult. Young Thomas appears barely able to remain upright as he navigates toward the exit, his inexperienced body having been pushed far beyond its natural limits by demands that would challenge seasoned workers under the best circumstances. His pale complexion and unsteady movement suggest someone approaching the edge of physical collapse, though he maintains sufficient awareness to continue moving toward the promise of rest that lies beyond the factory gates. The sight fills you with concern for his welfare and apprehension about your own ability to endure similar challenges day after day for months or years to come. The exit process itself requires navigating through bottlenecks created by gates designed to control worker movement rather than facilitate efficient passage, forcing hundreds of exhausted people to wait in lines that test patients already strained by 12 hours of mechanical discipline and physical demands. The gatekeeper performs his final count of the day, ensuring that no workers remain inside the factory where they might rest without permission or potentially damage equipment through unsupervised access to machinery that represents the company's most valuable assets. The transition from the factory's artificial environment to the outdoor world creates a sensory shock as your body attempts to readjust to natural air circulation, variable lighting conditions, and acoustic environments that include sounds other than mechanical noise. The contrast highlights how completely the industrial environment has dominated your sensory experience throughout the day, creating artificial conditions that bear little resemblance to the natural world that human beings evolved to inhabit. The evening air, while still contaminated with industrial pollution from dozens of neighbouring factories, seems almost pure by comparison to the toxic atmosphere you have been breathing for 12 hours. You take deep breaths despite the pain in your throat, trying to clear your lungs of accumulated dust and chemical residues, while knowing that tomorrow will bring identical exposure to the same industrial toxins that are gradually shortening your life expectancy with each passing day. Historians still argue whether the Industrial Revolution's transformation of working conditions represented progress toward improved living standards, or a temporary regression in human welfare that eventually led to better circumstances through economic development and social reform. Walking through the factory gates after 12 hours of industrial servitude, feeling the accumulated damage in every muscle and joint, the question of progress seems less important than the immediate challenge of surviving enough days of such treatment to earn wages sufficient for basic survival. The social dynamics that governed factory floor relationships continue outside the gates, though modified by exhaustion and the different environment that allows for more natural human interaction. Workers who maintained careful distances during working hours now walk together, sharing quiet conversations about the day's challenges and tomorrow's prospects, while their bodies slowly begin the process of recovering from industrial abuse that will resume again before dawn. You notice how differently people move once freed from the mechanical precision required by factory work. Though the transition takes time, as muscles that have been locked in repetitive motions for 12 hours gradually remember how to function in more natural patterns. Some workers stretch and bend, attempting to counteract the physical distortions created by prolonged maintenance of unnatural postures, while others simply concentrate on placing one foot in front of the other as they navigate toward whatever rest and recovery the evening hours might provide. The knowledge that this entire ordeal will repeat tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day for the foreseeable future, adds a psychological weight to the physical exhaustion that makes the prospect of recovery seem almost impossible. The industrial system has created a cycle of daily abuse and inadequate recovery that systematically wears down human beings until they become either perfectly adapted to inhuman conditions or physically unable to continue participating in the mechanical processes that have consumed their youth, health, and dreams. The evening light, filtering through industrial haze but still recognizably natural after 12 hours of artificial illumination, provides a welcome reminder that worlds exist beyond the factory walls, where human beings might live according to biological rhythms rather than mechanical requirements imposed by profit-seeking owners who view workers as interchangeable components in industrial processes designed to maximize production efficiency regardless of human costs. The walk home becomes a pilgrimage through an industrial landscape that transforms the simple act of returning to your dwelling into a journey through a mechanical purgatory where dozens of other factories continue their relentless operations, belching smoke and steam into the evening air, while their own armies of exhausted workers make similar trudges toward whatever rest they can find before tomorrow's bell summons them back to industrial servitude. Your feet, already tortured by 12 hours in ill-fitting boots on unforgiving factory floors, now must navigate cobblestone streets slick with industrial runoff and the accumulated grime that coats everything in this manufacturing district, where human habitation exists only as an afterthought to industrial production requirements. The streets themselves tell the story of industrial priorities through their design and maintenance, with smooth surfaces reserved for the transport of goods and machinery while workers must navigate broken cobblestones, puddles of mysterious liquids that reflect gaslight in oily rainbow patterns, and gutters that carry the combined waste from factories and tenements toward rivers that once ran clean but now serve as industrial sewers. Each step sends shockwaves through legs already strained beyond reasonable limits, while your body's natural shock absorption systems struggle to cope with impacts that healthy limbs would handle easily, but that feel devastating after 12 hours of industrial abuse. The visual landscape that surrounds your evening journey consists almost entirely of brick and iron monuments to industrial capitalism, factory buildings that stretch for city blocks, their rows of windows glowing yellow with gaslight as night shifts prepare to continue the mechanical symphony that never truly stops in Manchester's manufacturing district. Smokestacks rise like the spires of secular cathedrals dedicated to the worship of productivity and profit, their emissions creating artificial clouds that block the natural sky and replace it with a ceiling of industrial haze that filters even moonlight through layers of chemical pollution. You pass other workers making similar journeys, their faces bearing the same expression of exhausted resignation that you feel settling into your own features. The look of people who have been systematically drained of energy and hope, but who continue moving through sheer necessity rather than any remaining enthusiasm for life. Some workers move in small groups, sharing the comfort of companionship during these difficult transitions from industrial servitude to whatever recovery the evening hours might provide, while others walk alone, lost in private thoughts or simply too tired to maintain social interaction after 12 hours of carefully controlled workplace relationships. The industrial atmosphere follows you throughout your journey home, as the chemical odours and particulates that have saturated your clothing create a personal cloud of factory emissions that moves with you like an invisible burden. Your hair carries the scent of machine oil and cotton dust, while your skin continues to exude the metallic tang of iron filings and chemical residues that have penetrated beyond surface contact to become part of your very essence. You have become a walking advertisement for industrial employment, marked as clearly as cattle are branded to indicate ownership and purpose within economic systems that view human beings as resources to be consumed, rather than individuals deserving of dignity and care. The sounds of your homeward journey create their own distinctive symphony. The clip-clop of horses pulling wagons loaded with industrial goods, the rumble of steam engines in nearby factories, the conversations of other workers discussing the day's challenges and tomorrow's prospects. And underneath it all, the persistent ringing in your ears that serves as a constant reminder of the acoustic assault your hearing has endured throughout the shift. Even the relatively quiet residential streets maintain an underlying industrial soundtrack that never completely fades in neighbourhoods built around manufacturing centres that operate continuously to maximise profit and productivity. The social geography of your walk home reflects the rigid class distinctions that govern industrial society. As you pass through neighbourhoods arranged according to their relationship to the factory system, the areas closest to manufacturing centres house the workers in cramped tenements and boarding houses that maximise population density while minimising construction costs, while slightly better districts accommodate the skilled craftsmen and foremen whose specialised knowledge commands marginally higher wages and corresponding improvements in living conditions that remain modest by any reasonable standard but represent luxury compared to common worker housing. You notice how the quality of street lighting, pavement maintenance, and general cleanliness improves as you move away from the immediate factory district toward areas inhabited by merchants, professionals, and factory owners who profit from industrial production without subjecting their own bodies to its physical demands. The contrast serves as a constant reminder of your position within the economic hierarchy and the limited prospects for improvement that exist within a system designed to maintain strict divisions between those who own productive assets and those who sell their labour to survive. The evening air grows slightly cleaner as you distance yourself from the heaviest concentrations of industrial activity. Though the improvement remains marginal in a city where manufacturing processes have fundamentally altered the atmospheric composition for miles in every direction. Even the residential districts carry the distinctive odours of coal smoke, chemical processing, and industrial waste that mark Manchester as clearly as any map could indicate its primary economic function as a centre for textile manufacturing and related industries. Historians still argue whether the concentration of industrial workers in specialised districts represented efficient urban planning that facilitated economic development, or whether it constituted a form of spatial segregation designed to isolate workers from more privileged social classes, while concentrating them in areas where living conditions would be controlled and monitored by factory owners and government authorities. The evidence suggests both interpretations contain elements of truth, as industrial districts served economic efficiency, while also maintaining social divisions that prevented workers from developing broader perspectives on their circumstances. The fatigue that has accumulated throughout your 12-hour shift begins to compound during the walk home, as the additional physical exertion of navigating uneven streets and avoiding various hazards draws upon energy reserves that have already been depleted by industrial labour. Your body's natural recovery systems struggle to begin healing processes while you continue to demand physical performance, creating a cycle of exhaustion and inadequate rest that characterises the daily experience of industrial workers whose circumstances allow no genuine respite from physical demands. You observe other workers employing various strategies for managing the transition from workplace to home, from those who walk quickly to minimise the time spent navigating difficult streets, to others who move more slowly to avoid additional strain on bodies already pushed beyond reasonable limits. Some workers stop at public houses that cater to factory employees, seeking temporary escape through alcohol that provides brief respite from physical pain and psychological stress while potentially creating additional problems that compound existing challenges. The children you encounter during your evening journey represent both hope and tragedy within the industrial system. Those too young for factory work who still possess the natural energy and curiosity that 12-hour shifts systematically destroy, alongside those already employed in manufacturing who show premature signs of the physical and psychological damage that industrial labour inflicts on developing minds and bodies. The contrast highlights what industrial employment costs in terms of human development and potential, as childhood becomes a luxury that economically desperate families cannot afford to provide. The approaching darkness adds another layer of challenge to your homeward journey, as inadequate street lighting and the natural fatigue that affects visual perception combine to make navigation more difficult and potentially dangerous. The gas lamps that provide illumination in better neighbourhoods give way to increasingly sparse lighting in working-class districts where municipal services reflect the economic value that society places on different categories of residents and their need for basic safety and convenience. Your tenement building looms before you like a vertical village crammed into the narrow confines that economic necessity has dictated for housing industrial workers. Its 4 stories of brick and mortar containing dozens of families packed into spaces that would challenge single individuals under better circumstances. The building's facade, blackened by years of industrial emissions and neglect that reflects landlord priorities focused on profit rather than maintenance, presents a grim welcome that matches your exhausted state after 12 hours of factory servitude. The narrow windows, many cracked or boarded over, create a patchwork pattern that speaks to the minimal investment in worker comfort that characterises housing designed to extract maximum rent from minimum space while providing just enough shelter to maintain a viable workforce. The climb up narrow wooden stairs to your 3rd floor room becomes an almost insurmountable challenge as your legs, already strained beyond reasonable limits by the day's industrial demands, must now lift your exhausted body through a vertical maze of creaking steps that seem to multiply with each floor you ascend. The stairway, worn smooth by countless thousands of workers who have made similar climbs over the years, provides no handrails or other support for those whose strength has been systematically drained by industrial labour that leaves little energy for navigating even the basic requirements of reaching home safely. Each step sends shockwaves through your compressed feet and aching legs, while your lungs struggle to process air that remains contaminated with industrial pollutants even within the residential building where coal stoves, oil lamps, and the accumulated exhalations of overcrowded humanity create their own toxic atmosphere that offers little relief from the factory's chemical assault on your respiratory system. The narrow stairwell traps these various odours and concentrates them into a distinctive bouquet that marks working-class housing as clearly as any address could indicate the economic status of its inhabitants. The sounds that emanate from behind the thin walls and doors tell the stories of dozens of other families struggling with identical challenges. Crying children whose parents lack the energy to provide adequate attention after 12-hour shifts. Coughing that speaks to the respiratory damage inflicted by industrial employment. And hushed conversations about wages, working conditions, and the constant anxiety that accompanies economic survival, balanced on the knife's edge of employment that could disappear without warning or explanation. Your room, when you finally reach it, represents both sanctuary and prison, a space barely large enough for the essential furniture and personal belongings that define your existence, but nevertheless the only place in the world where you can attempt to recover from the day's industrial abuse without direct supervision or immediate demands for productive output. The single window provides minimal light and even less ventilation, while the thin walls offer no real privacy from neighbours whose lives unfold in similar patterns of exhaustion and limited recovery that characterise the daily cycle of industrial employment. The transition from public spaces where behaviour must be carefully controlled to your private room allows for the first genuine relaxation of muscles that have been held in working positions for 12 consecutive hours. You sink onto your narrow bed, feeling your spine slowly begin to decompress as it escapes the unnatural postures required by carding machine operation. Though the relief brings its own form of pain as overtaxed muscles begin to register the full extent of the day's physical demands. Your body starts the complex process of attempting to recover from systematic abuse that will resume again before dawn brings another cycle of identical challenges. The evening routine that follows represents a careful balance between the recovery your body desperately needs and the practical requirements of preparing for tomorrow's shift while maintaining whatever elements of human dignity can be preserved within circumstances designed to reduce workers to mere extensions of industrial machinery. Removing boots that have compressed your feet into unnatural shapes throughout the day provides relief so intense it borders on euphoric. Though the freedom reveals the full extent of damage inflicted by inadequate footwear, worn during 12 hours of standing on unforgiving factory floors, the simple act of washing your face and hands becomes both necessity and ritual. Necessity because the accumulated grime of industrial labour must be removed before contaminating your limited clean clothing, and ritual because the process of cleaning represents a small assertion of human dignity against the systematic dehumanization that characterizes factory employment. The water in your wash basin quickly turns grey with cotton dust, metal particles, and chemical residues that have become integrated into your very skin throughout the day's exposure to industrial toxins. Your evening meal, prepared from ingredients that represent careful calculations of nutrition, cost, and convenience, provides essential fuel for bodily functions while offering limited pleasure or satisfaction compared to the substantial food that proper recovery would require. A piece of bread, some cheese, and perhaps an onion or apple constitute luxury compared to what many workers can afford, though the modest portions reflect economic realities that make adequate nutrition an unaffordable luxury for those whose wages barely cover rent, clothing, and other necessities that compete for limited resources. The social dynamics of tenement life create their own complex relationships as families and individuals attempt to maintain privacy and dignity within circumstances that make both nearly impossible to achieve. The thin walls that separate living spaces mean that personal conversations, family disputes, illness, and even intimate relationships become inadvertently shared experiences among neighbours who have no choice but to witness each other's struggles with poverty, exhaustion, and the various challenges that accompany industrial employment and urban living conditions. Historians still argue whether tenement housing represented an improvement over rural poverty that drove workers into industrial cities, or whether it constituted a new form of urban misery that traded familiar hardships for unfamiliar ones without providing genuine opportunities for improved living standards. The evidence suggests that individual experiences varied widely. Though the overall pattern involved trading rural poverty with some connection to natural environments for urban poverty characterized by overcrowding, industrial pollution, and social isolation that severed traditional community relationships. The evening hours provide limited time for activities beyond the essential tasks of eating, cleaning, and preparing for tomorrow's shift, though some workers attempt to maintain connections to broader human culture through reading, letter writing, or quiet conversations that offer brief escapes from the immediate pressures of industrial survival. These activities require energy that 12-hour shifts have systematically depleted, making intellectual or creative pursuits difficult to sustain despite their importance for maintaining psychological health and human dignity. The children who share your building's cramped quarters represent both the future workforce that industrial capitalism requires and the human cost of a system that transforms childhood into economic calculation, rather than a period of natural development and education. Some families attempt to protect their children from immediate factory employment through various strategies, while others face economic pressures that make child labour an unavoidable necessity for household survival that takes precedence over concerns about development, education, or long-term welfare. The gradual approach of bedtime brings both relief at the prospect of rest and anxiety about tomorrow's repetition of identical challenges that will test your physical and psychological endurance in ways that make each day's survival feel like a minor victory against overwhelming odds. The knowledge that this cycle will continue indefinitely, or until industrial employment destroys your health sufficiently to make continued work impossible, adds existential weight to physical exhaustion that makes true rest difficult to achieve despite desperate need for recovery. Sleep, when it finally comes, offers the only genuine escape from industrial demands, though even unconsciousness provides limited respite as dreams often replay the day's mechanical rhythms and tomorrow's challenges intrude upon whatever peace the night hours might otherwise provide. Your body attempts to heal damage inflicted by 12 hours of systematic abuse. Though the recovery time available before tomorrow's bell summons you back to factory servitude proves insufficient for genuine restoration of health and energy that proper human functioning requires. You lie in your narrow bed as the sounds of the industrial city gradually settle into the quieter rhythms of night, though even these evening hours provide no complete escape from the mechanical heartbeat that defines life in Manchester's manufacturing district. The distant thrum of steam engines continues from factories that operate through the night, their rhythmic pulsing creating a mechanical lullaby that serves as constant reminder of the industrial system that will reclaim your body and energy when dawn brings another cycle of 12-hour servitude to machinery designed without consideration for human limitations or dignity. Your body begins the complex process of attempting to heal the damage inflicted by today's industrial demands while simultaneously preparing for tomorrow's identical challenges. Though the recovery time available proves woefully inadequate for genuine restoration of health and energy that proper human functioning requires, every muscle aches with the particular pain that comes from repetitive motions maintained far beyond natural endurance limits. While your joints protest movements that would normally feel effortless, but now require conscious effort and generate sharp reminders of the day's systematic abuse. The cotton dust that has settled in your lungs creates a persistent cough that punctuates your attempts at rest, each spasm serving as a reminder of the toxic atmosphere you breathed for 12 hours and will breathe again tomorrow, and every day after that, for as long as your employment continues or your respiratory system maintains sufficient function to keep you alive and productive. The metallic taste that coats your tongue reflects the chemical residues that have penetrated beyond surface contact to become integrated into your very essence, marking you as clearly as any brand could identify your role within the industrial system. Do you remember the fresh energy and cautious optimism you felt when first approaching the factory gates this morning? That vitality has been systematically extracted through processes as efficient as any mechanical operation, leaving you depleted not just physically but spiritually diminished by exposure to conditions that reduce human beings to interchangeable components in production systems designed to maximize output while minimizing costs, including the cost of worker welfare that represents an unnecessary expense in the economic calculations that govern industrial operations. The sounds filtering through your tenement's thin walls tell stories of dozens of other families engaged in similar struggles with exhaustion, poverty, and the constant anxiety that accompanies economic survival balance precariously on employment that could vanish without warning or explanation. Children cry from hunger, illness, or simple need for attention that exhausted parents lack energy to provide after 12 hours of industrial labour that consumes not just physical strength but emotional resources required for family relationships and human connection that give life meaning beyond mere economic function. Sleep approaches gradually. Though your mind continues processing the day's experiences and tomorrow's challenges with the relentless efficiency that factory work has taught you to apply to every aspect of existence, reducing even rest to a calculated preparation for continued industrial servitude rather than genuine recovery that would restore your humanity along with your physical strength. Your dreams, when they finally come, will likely replay the mechanical rhythms that have governed your waking hours, creating a sleep experience that provides limited escape from industrial demands that have colonized even your unconscious mind. The knowledge that this entire cycle will repeat tomorrow and every day afterward for the foreseeable future adds psychological weight to physical exhaustion that makes true rest nearly impossible despite desperate need for recovery that your circumstances will never allow to occur completely. The industrial system has created a deliberate imbalance between demands and recovery that keeps workers perpetually depleted, ensuring their continued dependence on employment that might otherwise seem intolerable to people with sufficient energy to consider alternatives or organize collective resistance to systematic exploitation. Historians still argue whether the Industrial Revolution represented inevitable progress toward improved living standards that eventually benefited all social classes, or whether it constituted temporary regression in human welfare that concentrated wealth among factory owners while impoverishing the workers whose labour generated unprecedented profits for those with sufficient capital to own productive machinery. Your experience suggests that progress, if it exists, remains invisible to those who provide the human energy that powers industrial capitalism while receiving minimal compensation and no guarantee of future security or improved conditions. The evening air that filters through your room's single window carries the perpetual industrial atmosphere that defines urban life in manufacturing centres, where human habitation exists, primarily to support productive activities rather than to provide environments conducive to health. Happiness, or human development that extends beyond economic function within systems designed to extract maximum value from human labour while minimizing investment in worker welfare or long-term sustainability. The approaching darkness offers promise of rest, though even sleep provides incomplete refuge from industrial demands that have structured your existence according to mechanical requirements rather than biological rhythms that evolved over millennia to support human health and well-being. Your body will attempt to heal tonight's damage while preparing for tomorrow's identical abuse, creating a cycle of inadequate recovery that gradually wears down your physical reserves until continued employment becomes impossible, and economic necessity forces you to seek whatever alternatives exist for workers whose health has been destroyed by industrial labour. But for now, in these final moments before sleep claims your consciousness, you can allow your breathing to slow and your muscles to release their grip on the tension that industrial work has built into your very bones and sinews. The mechanical sounds that define your urban environment fade slightly as your awareness turns inward, seeking whatever peace can be found within circumstances that offer little comfort but nevertheless represent the reality that millions of workers share in the great industrial experiment that is transforming human civilization according to principles of efficiency and profit that may or may not prove compatible with human flourishing over the long term. Your eyelids grow heavy as exhaustion finally overcomes the anxiety and physical discomfort that have accompanied every moment since the morning bell first summoned you to industrial servitude that seems both eternal and impossibly fragile. Dependent on economic forces beyond your control or understanding, tomorrow will bring another day of identical challenges. But tonight offers the blessed unconsciousness that allows your human spirit to retreat temporarily from conditions that test the very limits of what flesh and soul can endure while maintaining some essential spark of dignity and hope that no factory system can completely extinguish. The last conscious thought that drifts through your fading awareness acknowledges the strange mixture of despair and resilience that characterizes industrial existence, the recognition that tomorrow will be difficult beyond description, combined with the quiet determination to face those challenges because the alternative involves surrendering to circumstances that would prefer to break your spirit along with your body. And some deep instinct refuses to grant that victory to mechanical systems that understand efficiency but remain fundamentally ignorant about the human heart that continues beating despite everything industrial civilization can do to stop it. Sleep comes finally, bringing dreams that will process the day's experiences and prepare your mind for tomorrow's continuation of this strange dance between human spirit and industrial machinery, played out in factories across the world, where millions of workers engage in similar struggles with systems designed to extract their labour while giving as little as possible in return. Rest well, fellow traveller through this mechanical age, for morning will come too soon, and the bells will ring again, calling you back to your place in the great industrial symphony that plays its relentless song of human effort transformed into private profit, day after day, year after year, until the music finally stops.